When it was 1 and 2%, it was fantastic.
So that's ideal for a first-time buyer.
And obviously that had the huge boom in terms of the market.
When you get property in your blood.
I don't know, it was a little bit difficult for us because we didn't really know what we wanted.
So thank you very much for joining episode 2 of the First Time Buyer Show. Today we've got a very special guest, Jackie Holt. Jackie, how are we doing?
Hi, I'm Jackie from Anthony James Estate Agents and here to talk to you today about the first-time buyer market.
Jackie, thank you very much for joining as a guest today. So before we get into this show, I just want to kind of, ask how it all started, how you became an estate agent, how you became the director of Anthony James. Where did it all begin?
Okay, so it began a very long time ago. I'm not going to tell you how long it was because then you'll know my age. So my property career started in London originally, and then I worked for a company called Hamptons International, which was a really, really great insight to starting my property career. Then looked to relocate to Southport, fell in love with the town over the years of visiting it, and went to my first job in an estate agency and found the customer service to be absolutely awful. So at that point, went home to my sister and I said, I've had enough of this, I'm going back to London. And she said, why don't we open our own estate agent? And here we are.
Here we are, years later.
Now we do block management, sales and lettings. Obviously, I run up the sales team of Anthony James.
Of course, amazing. And I'm sure, people listening can probably hear a bit of an accent on you. So where are you originally from, if you want to let them all know?
Originally from South Africa. So I left South Africa when I was 21. Moved straight to London and absolutely loved life in London, but it became a bit of a rat race later on in the years and decided needed a kind of cooler, calmer lifestyle, and that's where Southport came in.
So you moved up north to Southport,
yeah.
Can't complain, yeah. So of course, at the minute in time as well, we're in March 2025, how do you currently see the market at the moment in time? Do you see it in a good position or do you see it in a bad position? Because you've worked in a estate agency for years, so how do you kind of see it?
Well, it's been kind of like a different start to this year, actually. And I think it's because the change in the stamp duty that's happening in the end of March. You'll know all about that because you're very busy at the moment.
Yes, I
so
certainly am.
End of March, the stamp duty changes and it does increase. So since Boxing Day, we've been putting properties on the market, whereas normally people wait for March, April, May when the weather gets better, gardens are looking better, but people have seemed to got on early this year for the stamp duty purposes. So I found it's been a great start to the year. Obviously first time buyers are the beginning of our market and just the start of everyone moving up really.
Of course. And from that point of perspective as well, do you think, because obviously in 2022 the market kind of took a bit of a halt and the prices dropped, when the mortgage prices increased. Do you think going back from 2020 to where we're at now, the house prices have increased or they're slightly increasing or they're dropping down? How do you see it as a whole?
Property it's very specific to property. House prices have definitely increased, not massively, just slightly increased over since then, definitely. But the market's always relative. When interest rates are high, prices come down.
Of course.
So it all works out in the end.
Yes, absolutely. Now, being an estate agent for many years, if there's a first-time buyer who's interested in a property, what would the best way to be to approach someone like yourself who's selling a property?
Come into our offices, come and meet us, build that rapport with your estate agent. Don't ask your mum and dad to ring. You do it yourself, get on the phone, come and see us. Before you do that, though, I would suggest you get a list of requirements of what you're looking for and then come in and meet us and we'll build that rapport, because at that stage, if we don't have something for you and we really, really like you, then we're definitely going to find you something.
Of course. And, what about dress sense? Do you need to be rocking up in a suit or tracksuit? What do you reckon? It's just all natural?
Just well presented, obviously. I would always say just present yourself well, even for viewing properties, try and give a good impression to the seller or the agent at the viewing stage too.
From that point as well, if they're approaching you and they're saying, I'm very interested in a property, what should they have as well? Is there certain documents they need? Is there something that you ask for at the very start?
No, but The most important thing for any first-time buyer is to get that mortgage in principle first. That's your very, very first step, because how can you look at properties if you don't know how much you can spend? So that would be your first step, to go and see a mortgage advisor. Bring us that mortgage in principle so we know you're ready to go. We don't actually ask for proof of deposit or anything until you've officially made an offer on a property.
So a mortgage in principle as a whole, you'd give
Yeah.
that advice to a first-time buyer to get one
Definitely.
ready, speak to a broker and visit, get it all sorted and then visit yourself.
And that's
yeah.
another piece of advice. Go to a broker. I mean, Barron's down the road, they're excellent. They've got such a big market share of mortgages. Even if you go and see your bank initially, that's great, because then you've got something to compare what a mortgage advisor can advise you. So I know initially I went to my bank and I was offered 2% less when I went to Barron's, which saved me quite a considerable amount of money on my first mortgage.
That's a lot over time, that,
It
isn't
is,
it?
yeah.
So you're telling people, go to a mortgage broker and don't do it yourself?
Yeah, go to a mortgage broker. Honestly, mortgage brokers are so much handier than your bank itself. They'll come see you in an evening. Like I say, they've got a multitude of products, not just that one offer that they can offer you.
So let's just say I've been to see a broker. I'm buying my first property. I've been to see a broker. I've got my mortgage in principle. I've approached Jackie Holt. I've told Jackie, you know, I'm really interested in the property. This is the one I want to get. I accept the offer. What would the next stages be when we go to view the property?
So once we view the property, I would say you need to look at certain things on your first purchase. Obviously, you want to look at anything that's going to cause you any unexpected costs. So I always say, get a little tick list together. Very importantly, look at the boiler. How old it is, has it been serviced, has it been maintained. Have a look at the electric switchboard and see if it's up to the current standards, else that's something else you're going to have to pay for. And obviously the windows is definitely quite a big one as well, and the roof structure to see. Those are the main things I think that buyers should be looking at when viewing properties.
Okay, and would you recommend them to take a notebook with them and say, you know, as you go,
definitely.
write it
Take
down?
a notebook with you, because you get mixed up between, if you're viewing 5 properties in one day, you end up getting confused and you'll add this one's bedroom into that one, you know, in memory. So even if you print the details out and make notes on each property whilst you're viewing it.
Perfect. And with that information, would you prefer they give it to you and then you discuss it with the seller directly, or would you prefer they give it to their solicitor or conveyancer?
Well, I would say that's part of the negotiation stage. So, you know, say for instance, there's a beautiful house, but it needs a new boiler. There's going to be some sort of negotiation on that, really. And that's at the initial stage.
Of course. And would you recommend a first-time buyer to get a survey on the property or not?
100% yes, definitely. My theory is always let the bank do their survey, because they're the biggest risk. It's all their money that they're giving over to you. So let the bank do their survey. If it highlights anything, by all means get extra people in to have a look at those, investigate what they've pulled up.
Amazing, okay. Now, into the next part as well, you know, I'm sure you deal with a lot of people who are making offers in the negotiations process which is involved. As a first-time buyer, should they be offering above the asking price or maybe becoming below? What advice would you give them?
So that's a bit hard. My theory is, if you want a property, go for it. You know, go to the asking price. If that's the house you want and it ticks all your boxes, and if you want it, there's probably 10 other people behind you that want it too. So it depends how much you really want that property. So I would always say asking price, and then see if it actually goes over, but don't seal it at the asking price.
Okay. And then in the next stage as well, let's just say, you know, the first time buyer's buying the property and there is 10 people behind them and they start to get in a bidding war. What advice would you give to them? Would you say, you know, don't let your emotions get involved, or how would you advise
it's a
them?
really hard one, that, because your emotions do get really involved, especially the day you view. Ring them the next day and their mindset would have changed, because then they'll start thinking realistically, oh, there wasn't enough parking, or was the garden actually facing the right way for me? So I always like to give them the next day, because then they're not acting on emotion, it's more rational thinking.
So would you also advise them as well, if they've got a certain amount on the mortgage in principle, not to go over that amount, because it could cause issues as well? If you sell the property and then you've not seen the mortgage in principle, which states how much they're going to have, will that cause issues?
Yeah, we always like to see the mortgage in principle, just so we know how much they've got to lend. Obviously, as a buyer, I would always say try and spend as much as you possibly can, because property prices go up, don't they? And what's expensive today is cheap tomorrow.
Absolutely. In terms of a first-time buyer walking through the door as well, and they want advice on what they should be looking for in properties or what they need to do at the start of the process, what are kind of the main pointers you'd give them? Because I mean, growing up in secondary school, you're not really taught much information as how to buy a property or what you need to do. So what pointers would you give them to help?
So try and guide them through the viewing stage, and highlight things that could possibly cause future, money problems for them in the future. So you're not going to go and buy a house that is reeking of damp the minute you walk through the door, and all the plug sockets on the skirting boards, everything shouting, I need a lot of work. And then you as the agent should be highlighting those things to the buyer. And if you're not doing it now, these problems are going to come up after survey anyway. So you've probably wasted 4 weeks of that property being under offer if you don't, address these things from the minute you walk into a property.
Of course. Okay, so they've approached you, the offer's been accepted.
Yeah.
What are the next stages now? What
Next
happens?
stage is go straight back to your mortgage advisor and go and get your mortgage application put in. So then they'll take down all your finance information that you've already provided, but they actually put a proper application in. During that visit, you generally pay for your survey. So the surveyor will give the agent a call within a week normally of that appointment and book your survey. I would say don't instruct your solicitor until you've done your mortgage, because as you know, a lot of mortgage lenders want certain solicitors on their panel. So I would always wait until your mortgage application's gone in and then instruct your solicitor straight from there.
What advice would you give them? Not being biased,
Okay.
Let's say we don't know each other.
Even if I didn't know you, my advice to anybody is always use somebody local, because you want to go into their office and have a moan if you need to have a moan. Do not use online solicitors whatsoever. They're just an absolute nightmare. And they seem to often delay the process because they work in teams, so you don't have one solicitor actually working on your case. It's just being passed from person to person. So that is my advice. Use someone local, someone with the office in Southport, someone that you can go in and have a moan to if you need to.
How important is that, just having that one-to-one service with the client? Otherwise, like you're saying, you're dealing with teams. Can communication be delayed? What are the main principles of going with that one-to-one service compared to the bigger ones?
There's such a big difference, because you've got one person looking over your file, making sure that progresses. If I pick something up and leave it for one of my colleagues, I don't know whether she's picked that up or not, or do you know what I mean? So it's the continuity of business, and that makes such a difference when you can phone your solicitor, speak to them, and they know exactly what you're talking about.
Amazing. So your main advice is
stay local.
Say it to the camera, Jackie. Stay local.
And use someone that's got good reviews.
Go with someone who's got good reviews. Okay. So in terms of the process as well, throughout they've selected the solicitor or conveyancer and completion, what advice would you be giving to the clients during this process? And usually, how long do you think it usually takes in the previous years you've dealt with?
I'd say, unless you're really a good solicitor like yourself, I think, how long did we get your brother's property through? Was it 3 weeks?
Yeah, it was really fast.
It was
fast,
3 weeks.
VIP service when you go with me, so that's what you get.
But no, not every sale gets through in 3 weeks, unfortunately. So I normally say 6 to 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously now there's a little delay because all solicitors are really busy because of the stamp duty change. But things that can often delay is if a property is leasehold. Yes. So at that point of offer stage, you get onto the management company and you say, get that leasehold information pack out. You as the agent should be chasing all those little bits for the solicitor so that he can or she can work as quick as possible on the case.
Yeah, and I think that's so important as well. If there's a first-time buyer who's got no knowledge whatsoever about the property market, whether they're buying a freehold or a leasehold, it's so important that they're giving the information on it.
100%. I mean, it's so hard with freehold and leasehold. Obviously, flats are all leasehold. You do get some leasehold properties, but don't let that deter you from buying a property, because
No.
that's something that can easily be rectified if it is a problem for some people, but a lot of people don't see it as a problem at all.
100%. And if there are leasehold elements involved, it won't always delay the transaction, especially if it's a freehold house, but there's a
Yeah.
leasehold element involved. It won't delay the transaction really,
That's good.
of course. So in terms of, the clients going through the process of the legality side and the purchasing the property, would you update them once a week? How would it work? Would you let them know to contact you whenever, pop in the branch? How would that work?
Yeah, so with first-time buyers, you want to guide them through the process. Everyone just expects everyone to know how the process works, and it's actually, you've got to give them the handheld service from beginning to end. So, your offer's been accepted, get onto your mortgage company now, make sure your mortgage application goes in. Then I'm ringing them a week later saying, look, we've still not heard from your surveyor. Can you chase that up? Week 3 sales memos have gone out now. Have you paid for your searches? So just talking them through every single step of the process so they know what's next and they know what's coming. I always say to them, right, your searches are in. You probably won't hear from me now for 2 weeks because I'm going to wait for them to return before I put another chase on it. And then we diarise all those little things to inform them of what's the next process.
Of course. And as the first-time buyer isn't fully aware of the process in terms of the searches, what advice would you usually give to them? Would you tell them how long they usually take, between 3 to 4 weeks? Is it imperative that you let them know that searches, there's going to be a bit of, limbo, and there's going to be a bit of radio silence whilst we wait for the searches?
Yeah, we always say to them, look, you're not going to hear from me for 2 weeks, and then I'll do a chase in 2 weeks because we're waiting for these to come back before your solicitors start raising inquiries.
Of course, amazing, okay. So just from start to finish in the process then, so they've visited the office at Anthony James.
Yeah.
They've approached Jackie
Hopefully
Howard.
you've seen a mortgage advisor before that.
Yes.
I would always suggest before that. Just a little tip, go and see a mortgage advisor as early on as possible because they could even give you advice on paying back debts, saving a bigger deposit. There's so many good government schemes for first-time buyers. You've got the ISA, you've got the Help to Buy, you've got all these discounts on new build properties. Those are probably the best ones to go for because there's so many different incentives that can be given out. Use them, go for them.
So the biggest piece of advice you give to your first-time buyers is go and get a mortgage in principle. Get
your
that
mortgage
sorted.
because you might have a credit card to pay off. You might not be on the voters roll. These are all little things that help towards you getting that better product of mortgage. So go and speak to someone because sometimes it takes 6 months planning before you can actually get that mortgage, and it's just working towards that stage really.
Okay. And in terms of selecting what agent to work with, of course, as a first-time buyer, how would you give them information on what are the best agents to choose in the area? Would you say check the reviews online, check how long we've been going for? How would it work?
No, I wouldn't really say that. I think if you were selling, I would give that advice.
Yes.
But as a buyer, you are house motivated. So wherever you see that house advertised with, you go into that agent and you go and view that property.
What, in terms of timelines as well throughout the process, what advice would you give to the buyers as well? Would you say chase your solicitor every week, send them an email every week? How would you advise them in that?
So I try and update the buyers to where we are, and you and me, we communicate really well. So you tell me what's going on, and that saves the buyer ringing you to find out what's happening. So we try and keep that communication going throughout the whole process.
So Jackie, how can a first-time buyer see if the property is overpriced or not that they're interested in?
So generally, and unless it's the first one they're viewing, they'll have a look at probably 3 to 4 properties before they find the right one. Comparing these properties together, they'll get a good indication of whether they're overpriced or whether they're priced correctly. We've also got lovely tools like Zoopla, sold in your street prices. Buyers are very well educated and you're given a lot of tools online now to actually go and do evaluation yourself on the property. So that's a good way of finding out whether it's overpriced or not. It's just doing a bit of research on the area and the property.
Okay, and say they're interested in this property as well, which they've found. Should they have multiple viewings before they make a bid for the offer or not?
If I get a second viewing, I expect an offer in that second viewing. So I'd say emotion rides you the first day. Make your second viewing where more logic sits in, and then you'll know whether you want to make an offer again. I'm happy to show buyers 3-4 times a property before they make an offer, you know, but I know a lot of agents won't show a property more than 3 times.
Okay, interesting. And in terms of Rightmove, which we've mentioned as well, there can be key phrases on there such as chain free or chain involved. Now, what are the differences?
Okay, so chain-free property means that that person selling that property is not moving into another property that's connected to the sale. So that's ideal for a first-time buyer, because the reason first-time buyers are so loved in the market is because they've got nothing to sell. So they're the start of the process. Then if they're buying another property that's chain-free, that should take a lot quicker. But if that person's then buying another property above them, that one's buying another property above them, we can get chains of up to 10 people sometime, and that can delay the process just because each sale needs to catch up to each other before we can come to a completion on all of them.
Yeah, so it's almost like a stack, isn't it? They're relying at the first time buyer.
And that's why our first time buyers are so important, because they start the stack for us.
Yes, and also as well with a first time buyer, if there's someone in the middle of the chain and there's an issue, that can of course cause an emotional issue for the first time buyers as well. So
Definitely.
it is sometimes advised to look in for a chain-free property, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So what would the golden rule be as advice for the first time buyer then? If you could give them one little pointer, not just a mortgage in principle, what would the golden rule be for them?
On a property, I would say, if you can't fix it, don't buy it. So when you're viewing a property, if there is no parking on the front, so you've got no drive to park and you've got double yellows outside, that's a situation you can't fix. Don't buy it.
Don't buy it.
If you've got a small back garden, there's nothing you can do about that small back garden. But if it needs a new kitchen or bathroom, those things can be fixed. So I always look at a property and think, if I can fix it, I can buy it. Make sure it's within your budget and the repairs are within your budget, then go for it.
Amazing, okay. Well, Jackie, just what I like to do with my guests is one sentence, one word of advice. So what I'd ask you to do is if you can point into the camera and give one word of advice to anyone listening who's a first time buyer,
Okay.
what would it be?
Get on the property ladder as quick as you can and as young as you can, because we will all work until we can pay our mortgages off. So if you want to retire early, get on the property ladder early.
There you go, you heard it first. Get it on the property ladder early. So Jackie, thank you very much for being a guest today.
Thank you.
Where can everyone find you on social media? Whereabouts?
Social media, obviously, we've got this beautiful building on Charlotte House. Yeah, give us a shout anywhere, contactable. Our faces on our boards, our mobile numbers are on our board, so we're contactable pretty much everywhere.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Jackie, for joining, and thank you as well for listening to the
Thank
First Time
you.
Buyer Show, episode 2. Leave a comment below if you want me to ask any of the professionals any questions that you want to find out about how to buy your first property. Thank you very much and see you in the next episode.